Here at the Surgical Cave Hill School of Business and Management, located at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, we meet the needs of the upwardly mobile professionals. Our business school functions in an evolving global space where the need to have that competitive edge distinguishes you as a professional. Our academic curriculum offers a variety of programs that gives you that edge. We offer our students a doctorate in business administration. Then, there's our executive masters in business administration. Our Surgical Cave Hill School of Business and Management is for you. Enroll now.
It's 6:10, so we have given our 10-minute grace. So it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you to what I see as a special edition of the Quarterly Caribbean Investment Report, usually hosted by myself and my dear friend and colleague here, Mr. David Ellis, well-known journalist, Barbados across the region. So this evening, we are probably going to spend less time on the report to some extent and try to get a bit of a roundup as to what is happening with the COVID-19 pandemic across the region, which is really top of mind for everyone. David, any opening remarks? You're muted, Dave.
My apologies and good evening to all. From our vantage point here in Barbados, the situation is rather serious at the moment. You may recall that Barbados locked down on 2 previous occasions because of the coronavirus. But on this occasion, the government has opted for a policy of trying to remain open for as long as possible. So much so that the Prime Minister emphatically stated that it was neither option 1, 2, or 3 for Barbados. We are at a stage, though, where, as I understand it today, we should have had about 301 additional cases. We had 318 yesterday, and all last week, we were up in the 200s. We have reached a stage now where we have had to go in the direction of home isolating. Basically, that's where we are. We're self-isolating at home rather than what we were doing before, which was to have people taken away from their homes so that they couldn't contaminate others. But the situation is such that we are now concentrating on those who are ill to put them in those facilities. What is the impact of this on business? Well, the whole objective of not having a lockdown was aimed at protecting business. Business houses had said that many of them were on their last legs. And if we had a lockdown, then it would have impacted on tourism in a very big way. Airlines would stop coming. There was this thrust and this need to keep the tourism industry going because the bottom had fallen out of it earlier. What's left to be seen in Barbados, though, is this. Whether, while Barbados has decided that it will not go in the direction of a lockdown, whether COVID is going to lock us down in its own way. Because if you don't have enough people to do the work, and if you have so many shutdowns caused by illness, and if you have a high rate of infection, then visitors are going to balk at coming. And if in their judgment, your level of rate of vaccination is not as high as they would want it to be, that is also causing them to have second thoughts about coming to Barbados.
Okay, thanks for that introduction. So what I'm going to do first up is just to ask our other panelists to introduce themselves. Just introduce yourself and what you're representing. And then I will move straight and do the report. I already try to do it in 10 minutes maximum. And then I'm gonna have some comments from Mr. Chinapumo from a corporate end responding. And then we would get the view on the pandemic from St. Vincent and Grenada. So just quickly ask the other panelists to introduce themselves in no particular order. You're muted there, Dexter. You're muted.
Yep, I should be okay now. Good evening to all. Good seeing you, Professor Robertson, another panelist. Yeah, I'm Dexter Rose from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'm right now operate freelance, as I should say it. And I invite you all later on to listen to my jazz program on NBC Radio. That's at 9 o'clock, called Jazz Tropical. but I've got a lot of experience in newspaper and the rest of it, and diplomacy, but be glad to talk to you a little bit on the other side.
Okay, good, great.
All right, I'm Callistra Farrier. I'm a journalist in Grenada, where you guys know we're a hot spot these days for COVID-19. I host a television program called The Narrative. It's a regional program. It's broadcast on WPG-10 television. And I'm also a senior writer with the New Today newspaper here in Grenada.
Ian, I think it's your turn.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to join you all. My name is Ian Chinupu. I'm the Group Chief Financial Officer, Executive Vice President at the Massey Group, the Massey Holdings Limited, which is the parent entity for the Massey enterprises across the Caribbean region and South America into Guyana, Colombia, and the US as well. So a pleasure to be here. I hope to bring the Massey perspective and the corporate perspective to the group. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for that. And so I'll just give a little brief overview for persons who may have not tuned in for our early edition. So the objective of what we do every quarter, we present a report looking at the performance of the companies listed on the 6 stock exchanges in the Caribbean. So we have a stock exchange in Bahamas, in Barbados, Eastern Caribbean, Guyana, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago. And we perceive that there's a gap in that in our reporting. You know, the central banks and others give us a lot of information about how the economy is doing at a macro level, but as persons living in the region, looking to invest funds, what are the opportunities across the region? So what I'm going to quickly do is take you through this edition of the report. I kind of abbreviated it because I really wanted to talk about COVID today. Okay, so essentially what do we cover? So this is really what we cover, and these are the investment opportunities that we cover. And we sort of group the companies into categories by sector: communications, conglomerates like Massey, energy, finance, manufacturing, property, retail, tourism, utilities, the catch-all category, preference shares, and corporate bonds. So in all, we track the performance of 211 equities listed across the region. The majority are in Jamaica, followed by Bahamas, then Trinidad, Guyana, Eastern Caribbean, Barbados, and 21 corporate bonds. So for the first 9 months of this year, 4.9 billion shares have traded across the region. And one thing that comes out clearly from our report, almost all of the action in terms of trading volumes is in Jamaica. So our volume leaders, our top 5, Wigton Wind Farm, Derrimont Trading, Trans Jamaica Highway, Pulse Investments Jamaica, RJR Jamaica. These are really our volume leaders. These are the most active stocks across the region so far for this year. I guess the heart of what we do, which is our sort of proprietary material, what we do is we construct these indices that track the performance of the investments. For the 2 people on the call who might be interested in the details of this, They're proprietary indices, but essentially we follow the methodology that is used in compiling like the Standard & Poor's 500. And what we would have done is that on January 4th, the first trading day of the year, we set the base for the index at 1,000. And we calculate the returns in US dollars. So if you want to think about it as a layperson, what if you had put $1,000 on January 4th into a diversified portfolio of investments across the region? How would it be doing? So as of September 30th, the index was at 1052.2. So it had gone up 52.2 points, a 4.96% return for the year. Then we have what we call the CSX 30, which is what we think of as the 30 most representative stocks across the region. So we try to have a couple of stocks in there from each of the exchanges, from each of the sectors and the big players. So Massey would be in there and so on. And that CSX 30 is up 3.3% for the year. And if we contrast it to what's happening globally, stock markets in the developed world have been rebounding as their economies have rebounded from COVID-19 pandemic. And our returns continue to lag. So the S&P 500, which tracks the US market, is up 16.4% for the year. And the FTSE, which tracks the UK, is up 7.8%. Now, it's quite good that they are still up, that we are not in negative territory. And one of the benefits of the regional markets is if you look at the volatility index, your returns are much less volatile. There's much less up and down. And I think this goes to one of the key points about the pandemic, which is why I am in a way so passionate about it and what's happening. The companies represented in what we are presenting here are the so-called big boys and girls in the Caribbean. These are the big companies. They have been able to pivot and continue to do their business online in many cases. In some cases, shopping and other aspects of the pandemic may actually have done well for their business. What we are unable to capture somewhat here are those micro enterprises and others that are really the ones hurting the most from the COVID-19 pandemic, because they can't do it. That vendor can't sell online. They require that foot traffic and so on. Again, we also do some sector indices, and some of these sectors indices are doing reasonably well for the year. So our financial services index is up 6.28% for the first 9 months. Our communications, utilities, and entertainment is up 4.53. And one of the things I've learned from this pandemic, Dexter, is that no matter how bad things are, there are a couple of things people keep spending money on. So within this index, there are a couple of companies that provide lottery and other services, and they are doing very well. People continue to gamble and find other ways of entertainment. Manufacturing is kind of flat, 2.7. Tourism, retail, distribution index is up quite a bit. And a lot of that really is part of the distribution sector and aspects of property markets. There's a bit of a property boom in Jamaica. So in turn, we usually identify the 5 top performers. So what are the 5 best performing stocks in the region for the year? So if you are like Dexter and you're sitting on all that gratuity and retirement money and you're looking for somewhere to invest it, these might be some investments you look at. So Fesco out of Jamaica is our top performer so far, up 243% for the year. Demerara Bank Limited up 125%. RJR, media company in Jamaica, up 117.8. Jamaica Teas, a manufacturer out of Jamaica, does a lot of that bush tea. So I don't know if people are using the bush tea instead of the vaccine, but they're doing quite well, up 105. And Fosrich, relatively small financial services player in Jamaica, is up 97.3. And one of the things I really try to achieve with this quarterly webinar is to at least stimulate some interest around Caribbean investors about your investment opportunities within and across the region. So there are companies, there are investments that you could have doubled your money on the region in 9 months so far for this year. You know, you don't necessarily have to go Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all returns measured in US dollars. The 5 biggest decliners have come out of Jamaica. You have Salada Foods down 77%, MTLJ down 65%, EHL out of Trinidad down 43%, Palace Amusements down 39.3%, although that company had really had a massive run up, a bit of a correction there. One of my favorite companies not doing so well, Wigton Wind Farm down 34%. But again, you know, sometimes these declines represent some buying opportunities. You know, so some of these are really stocks that are retreating from some highs. As the pandemic continues, one of the challenges is that our regional governments are continuing to have to ramp up their debt. So we have a small table here with some of the debt as I try to keep an eye on that, because I think that's going to be one of the big policy issues coming out of the pandemic, whether the pandemic related debt and servicing that debt will be a drag on Caribbean economies. And I think one of the policy issues might be to have some sort of global initiative for pandemic related debt relief. And we usually end with a little bit of what we call investing school to some extent, just a little primer. So one of the features of the Caribbean market that I think is a little different is that on a lot of our exchanges, we have so-called preference shares. So you sort of have, with terms of equity, we can think of 2 types of shares, preference versus common. And preference shares are a sort of hybrid investment, offering some of the features of debt and equity. So in terms of cash flow rights, as we think about it, if you invest in preferred shares, you buy preferred shares, you're entitled to your dividends before the common shareholders, but you have to wait until the debt holders. Okay, so you're kind of in between. You get paid before the common shareholders, but the creditors or debt holders have to get paid first. In the event of bankruptcy, again, you get paid before the common shareholders, but only after debt investors. So in terms of a quick summary of preferred shares, they offer a guaranteed rate of return compared to common shares. So when you buy common shares, you're entitled to some dividends if there are any, and if the company chooses to pay them. But if you buy preferred shares, they promise you a guaranteed rate of return. So that's an advantage over the common shares, but you don't have the same upside potential. Huh? So if the company does extremely well, the common shareholders are the ones who are going to benefit from that residual. No matter how well or how badly they're done, as a preferred shareholder, you get that fixed rate of return. So you have some protection on the downside, but not as much, but you have to give up the upside. However, they don't offer you as much protection as debt, okay? They come after debt. So they're sort of hybrid investment between debt and equity, offering you some of the protections of debt, but not all the protections of equity. So I'm gonna stop my presentation there, and I guess I try to rush that. So, and I wanna move quickly to Mr. Chinapu, because from Massey, I think we're hoping we can get maybe 2 perspectives. One, as a corporation, you know, if you can tell us a little bit about Massey, the company, the profits, and the potential for it as an investor. Why should I invest in Massey? But also with Massey having a footprint pretty much across the region, I think you're quite uniquely placed to give us some insight into the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on your business. And also you are in a number of sectors. So I'm kind of asking you maybe two separate questions that you can comment on.
Sure.
Make a sales pitch for us about Massey as an investor. Why should I pick up the two of the hard-earned cents I have stashed in the mattress? Why should I put them in Massey? And then from Massey being in so many sectors and so many countries, if you can give us your perspective in terms of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on your business.
Well, actually, I hear it's two separate questions. So thank you, Professor, and so nice to meet you. I do also lecture at the Arthur Lockjack Global School of Business. So nice to be, at the Cave Hill event. So it's two separate questions, but there is a nexus. So I see, and rightly so, Massey has been categorized in your stock index as a conglomerate. But that is and that is fair, because we have operated in you could say 7+ industries historically. In 2 years, we'll be 100 years old. So the Massey Group has a long history in the region. In Barbados, of course, it was formerly the Barbados Shipping and Trading Entity. And Trinidad and Tobago, it was Neil and Massey. And of course, along the way, we would have acquired many legacy businesses that were quite well known in the various territories in which they operated. Some of you might, for those in Jamaica and so on, remember the High-Low brand that Grace Kennedy now operates. That actually was a Massey brand many years ago. So the Massey Group has historically been a conglomerate, but since 2019, we have actually changed our focus. In due course, you might actually refer to us as an investment management or investment holdings company versus a conglomerate. And you indicated, and I think Mr. Ellis and so on, quite aware that we have actually been bringing greater focus on a few industries. And therefore, we are actually in the process of just being focused on 3 core areas. The integrated retail, some of you will know it as Massey Stores and Massey Distribution. The motors and machinery aspect of business, where we represent Caterpillar in Trinidad and Tobago, and of course many well-known global brands and vehicles, and that's operating in 5 countries. We used to have an operation in Barbados. And of course, our gases business, which includes industrial gases as well as LPG in several countries across the region and into Colombia. I also chair the financial services line of business, which is an enabling business, which includes merchant bank and non-commercial banking, FI in Trinidad, Massey Finance GFC, and also the Massey Remittance business, which represents MoneyGram in many territories and Western Union in Barbados. So some of you will be familiar with that franchise as well. So in terms of Massey's presence, we're in more than 15 countries, we say, but it's probably closer to 20 when you look at our rep agencies and so on. So of course, Trinidad and Tobago is our single largest market. Barbados, Colombia, Guyana, we've been in Guyana 52 years. Jamaica, and of course, St. Vincent, St. Lucia as well. So we've operated, and of course the US is also a presence for us in terms of our distribution and our, in due course, our motors business as well as establishing a footprint there. So the group has really been on a growth path through focus. So we've sold a number of our enterprises. We've exited the IT business, what you know as Massey Technologies. And we're in the process of, our regulatory process in selling our Massey United insurance business now. But as well, we've also sold Sewell. We've sold our interest in Roberts Manufacturing in Barbados. And a couple other, our G4S business, which is our securities, our interest in the securities business as well. Because we're saying we can't be all things to all people. The conglomerate model in the past was really because in small markets, you had to expand through going into different industries. As barriers have shrunk, we're now seeing our capital has to be deployed into businesses where we believe we can be number one or number two in the space that we operate in. Why? Because that's how you get efficiency, and that's how you create, and I get to your second part of your question, Professor, shareholder value. We're not trying to be, as I said, all things to all people, but we're trying to be the best at what we do. And why should you buy Massey stock? It's my favorite topic. I also have the investor relations responsibility in the group. While we're not in Jamaica, and I can't see 243% return, the Massey Group started the year in January at a share price of $60.99. And we closed today at $83.53. So while that may not be double your money, because of our diversification across many different industries, I think our risk profile as a portfolio investment is quite strong. We are very close to systematic risk. I know the professor will know what I'm talking about there, meaning we are a good proxy for the market, and we are at the lower end of your risk scale, and therefore having a close to 40% return in that stock with such a low risk is a great performance in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's a very important point for the audience, I think, to digest, because investing can be complex, it can be intimidating, there's a lot to choose. And the point he's making is that if you have Massey, which is in so many different countries and in a number of different industries, if you put your money in Massey, then you can almost have an investment that is pan-Caribbean with just one investment.
That's right.
Rather than having to pick several stocks. So that's the appeal of something like Massey, where you have a lot of diversification in just one shot. And that's not to be sniffed at.
It's a portfolio in one. And I think among our conglomerate grouping, along with people like Grace Kennedy, Ansa McCall, and such wonderful entities, I think we've done well. I think we've done well throughout the pandemic. I think we've done well before the pandemic, and I think we've done well in spite of the pandemic. And I know that will certainly come up in the panel's discussions, and I'm happy to elaborate in whichever direction you'd like me to go in. But to do so, there was absolute focus on our customers and their needs, especially during the pandemic. We had to make them feel safe. We spared no expense in ensuring that our businesses that could operate, were allowed to operate during the lockdown, was safe for people as much as we could have made it. We also focused on efficiencies. And that's when I think we really truly soared in terms of our performance. Our management really understands the businesses. So as we got into this pandemic, we had to decide what was most important. And profit wasn't number one, it was health and safety. And we believe that profits were a result, an outcome of focusing on what people needed. We made sure in our stores, as much as we could, our supply chain, that we protected it. We made sure people had access to the products that they needed. And where necessary, we didn't focus our capital on bringing in luxury goods. We brought in the goods people needed to survive this pandemic. And I think people really responded to that. We also know that there are many different types of business models. And despite whatever people's choices, we made sure that all our businesses that people frequented had not only the actual safety and sanitary conditions, but they appeared to be so. And I think that brought people some comfort during this time. But there's so much more we can get into, and I'll let the panel direct my responses.
And David, anything you want to come in on?
Yes, well, I know a couple of things. It's a pan-Caribbean entity, and it therefore means that spanning different Caribbean countries, you are likely to get different responses to this whole question of COVID. And I'm curious to find out how that played out. But I'm also looking at the kind of country, it looks as though you are consolidating, yes. You've spoken about the fact that you are ridding yourself of certain entities because you want to concentrate on areas where you can be number one and number two. But in those areas, are we seeing expansion at all? What growth are we likely to see in those particular areas that you have decided you are concentrating on? So those are two areas that I'd like you to address for me.
Great, and I appreciate you seeing us as a pan-Caribbean. We don't see ourselves as that. We see ourselves as global. So you would probably have noticed since 2014, we have made significant investments into Colombia, for example, as a first step. I guess you can argue a bit of Central America and the Caribbean being very close, but it is a different entire culture, different language. And as of 2020, we were the single largest seller of motor vehicles and cars in Colombia. Now, it's a very fragmented market and we're less than 10%, but 42 million people in Colombia compared to 5 million people in the English-speaking Caribbean is a different scale. So when we say we want to be number one or number two in every market that we're in, it goes beyond. So the markets we don't see the market as just one country, and we don't see the marketplace as one product. So for example, in the automotive industry, we are operating not just in the car sales, machinery, we do automotive components, we do batteries, we do all different types of products within that space. So when we say we want to be a major player in that industry, we mean all aspects of that industry. And that is where our conglomerate experience, I think, will serve us well. In terms of our experience across the region in the COVID environment, by and large, we saw the majority of people, including and we say all our stakeholders from the government and the wonderful people in the health sector, as well as our customers and our employees. We saw generally all across our footprint, people took this, by and large, this situation very seriously. Customers would tell other customers, you're getting too close to the cashier, step back, before we could do so. I think the culture of our people is one that mirrors the Massey values of love and care. And while there were some exceptions, you must have that. By and large, the response of the society, and because of the nature of our business, it was reflected in our stores, in our operations, in our employees, having more than 12,000 employees. I was sharing earlier that we have lost some people, our employees, as have many organizations, but by and large, the majority of our staff, have been vaccinated. They've been taking up the vaccine, and they've been, some of them have gotten sick, but they've gotten better. So we feel that we've done well in terms of leading the way. We've sponsored one of the major private sector vaccine sites, the Napa site, which is the Performing Arts Center in Trinidad, where they had a vaccine site. Massey was the major sponsor of that site for the public for about 2 months. So, we're in this, and I think we're in this together. In terms of, I saw real discipline at times in Barbados, looking at how people would respect social distancing coming into the stores, respect the limit of the number of people in the stores. And I think as we go forward, David, we have a long road to travel, but our people are often categorized as carefree and love to have fun. But I saw a side of our people here that was responsible and disciplined, certainly allowing us at times to try to reopen and support our government and what they're trying to do.
We have some questions here. One is coming from Dr. Damien Dublin in Dominica. They want to know what areas of investment are doing well in this COVID climate, and would strategic mergers be encouraged?
Of course. There are some great businesses that are now being challenged and that can benefit from partnership, whether equity-based or through customer and supplier relationships with other companies that have weathered the storm well. So certainly strategic equity partnerships, or just strategic partnerships on the whole, I think is going to be a feature going forward as capital has been depleted in several industries and needs to be reinvested. And capital is like water running down a hill, right? It will find the easiest path forward. What businesses are doing well in this environment? Well, clearly communications and technology are areas that will do well. And both in terms of people who produce content for it and people who provide the infrastructure and network and hardware for it. We also believe that our areas of distribution in terms of the Massey Group, in terms of the maintenance, people are now going to take much better care of the assets they have, their vehicles, etc. So while you may not, you still have people buying cars and buying machines because you're going to need some capital investment. The governments are going to have to make some capital investment. We also believe that people are going to be spending their money in a very wise way. So look for opportunities that can allow people to extend the life of their capital assets in terms of maintaining their vehicles, in terms of maintaining their properties, taking better care of their health. People are now much more health conscious. Massey also represents several of the pharmaceutical companies across the region, and therefore bringing more and more suitable product into the region. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, we provide all the PCR tests and so on to the country. We also provide medical oxygen. So we have diverted production into medical oxygen, even though that may have a lower margin than what our capacity could be used for because it's needed. And we see that as being well received. And of course, demand has grown. So if you're in the health space, if you're in the technology space, and if you're in the business of extending the life of assets that companies need and people use, energy and so on, we believe that would be a very good place to be.
But let's cross over to one of our colleagues in, let's say, St. Vincent, in this case, Dexter Rose.
You're doing what's up, David? Yeah. Now, it's interesting talking and hearing at this level about investments and that kind of thing. I would like to probably share what I like to consider the experience of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the common man and how the whole COVID experience impacted persons and how people responded to it. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we were unique in a way that I think it's the only territory that never experienced a shutdown during the entire process. When Prime Minister Gonsalves made that move, it was seen in some quarters as a maverick kind of move. It was bold, and you heard detractors who would say, well, it makes sense he shut down anyway because nobody's coming here. Not quite that. I think the concern as a journalist looking at the situation, I think his concern was what would happen to the man on the street, the man who sells, the lady who sells with a tray, the person who sells with an ice box. Now, those persons like that might not mean a lot to a major investor. But for someone running a government, one would have to consider who is going to take care of those persons if you shut down the country and commerce ceases to operate. And it worked for us. It worked for us. I believe Professor Robinson might have some figures in terms of how we did relative to other countries in the past year. I think we fared pretty okay. At the same time, we, as an agricultural country, we still had farmers exporting, as we do, our produce to our regular markets, Trinidad, some cases Barbados too, up the islands. And that is very important because in an economy that's was already under stress, you had to have people continuing to produce. Of course, one would say the Masseys and the other people like that who would benefit, but it's part of a continuum. St. Vincent, we were lucky in that we also had last year a general election in November. We had instituted also, in response to the COVID, a system of quarantine for visitors coming here. We did it very early, and I stand corrected, but I think we were one of the first countries that went into quarantining persons, and that worked pretty okay.
Can I ask you a question? Because the Delta variant has been a game changer, and I want you to give some sense of what has happened when it comes to the number of deaths and the number of cases since the Delta variant, while you were committed to the concept of remaining open as an economy.
Well, you jumped there before me, because for a very long time, St. Vincent's death toll was very low. A matter of fact, for a very long time, it remained at 12. Until the advent of the Delta variant, because it's interesting. I mean, some of us joke and say, oh, God must have lived in St. Vincent. Because I don't think we were doing anything. People were sanitizing. They'd go to supermarkets, they'd go to stores, people wear their masks, they're sanitizing, they're going to the businesses, that kind of thing. And a lot of us in Central were saying, but what is happening? Because are we doing anything special that nobody else is doing? How come the numbers are not going up? I don't think anybody has yet answered that question. And as a result of that, we had a very slow take-up. We had, and we still have, a very slow vaccination take-up. As a matter of fact, if you see a chart of the entire region, we stand just above Haiti and Jamaica.
What's the consequence of that? And what's the consequence of that?
Which is amazing. Well, the consequence of that, we're talking about the Delta variant. From the time the Delta variant came in, we have seen suddenly, and it has begun to scare people, finally. Because what we were saying like Vincentians don't seem to be taking this thing too seriously. You had protests because government wanted to mandate certain procedures. We have suddenly seen people being tested, being declared COVID positive, and dying within 2 days. That is beginning to scare people. Yet even with that, our take-up has not skyrocketed.
Okay, so that brings us back to Mr. Ian Chilapu, and the whole question of how a business of the size of Massey has dealt with this whole concept of encouraging people to become vaccinated, because that has been seen as a necessity for businesses to continue to remain open. It has presented businesses with quite a dilemma. Share with us how Massey has been able to deal with it.
We have not taken any one single approach. We have tried them all. So certainly, as I mentioned earlier, we have pumped a lot of money into private vaccination sites. We've supported it. We've done so quietly. We haven't been advertising same, but we've spent millions of dollars in vaccination sites and making sure that the staff, they are paid and so on. We've also been purchasing equipment for ministries of health that they need to operate their vaccination sites. So we've been using our supply chain to get this equipment in, and we've been using our resources in our Massey Foundation, which is our separate entity to Massey, but it's every year we put 1% of our profits there for many, many years. So they have been supporting by doing that.
You had also an incentive program. You had an incentive program for vaccinations?
Yes, we did for our staff, and we also contributed to the incentive program for the public sites. In terms of, we even did things like sponsor performing bands and music and so on at the vaccine sites to get people to treat it as a fun event, get your kids.
Can you speak a little more about precisely what sort of incentives? Is that something you can elaborate on?
Sure. Well, essentially, we worked with our ministry and our health partners in terms of what they thought would work, and we would have contributed towards that. So it wasn't that Massey went and said, okay, you do this. But we did have for our staff as well as for the public, incentive programs in the stores and so on to get people to take extra precautions and to come out even before we had the vaccines, because we've been operating certain businesses throughout. Our groceries and so on, our pharmacies had to operate throughout. One of the things I heard from, I think is Dexter, right?
Dexter.
From St. Vincent, Mr. Rose, is about the man on the street and the lady who sells with the tray. And I would say one of the things, I don't know if you have a chance to go online, but please Google Nudge, NUDGE. It's a Massey program where we are actually putting millions of dollars into supporting small businesses, including, we started in Trinidad, we're going to Barbados, St. Vincent, St. Lucia. It's a separate company, 80% owned by Massey, 20% owned by Miss Anya Young-Chi. And that is, we are putting small business people's products on the shelves, and we are supporting you, collecting them, I'm giving you. So we are not taking any of that. We are bringing you forward as a small business person through the entire chain of the Massey Group is our intention, eventually to Guyana, Barbados. And Miss Julie Avey, who is our head of people and innovation, is leading that charge for us. So if it's not yet in St. Vincent, I can't say off the top. I know the plan is to get there quite soon. And we've started it in Trinidad. So we are going to be working, not just, giving a man a fish, but we'll be teaching you how to fish, and we'll be giving you access to our fish market in order to sell your fish.
Let me mention something. Excuse me, David, let me just mention something in St. Vincent as you mentioned it. Around Massey specifically, it's not a Massey program, but I've noticed that at your supermarket, you've had to contend with some thriving businesses of vegetable and fruit vendors outside, which I know has been creating some concerns maybe.
I mean, of course it would, but I would think that we support the local farmers and local people. There's always, when people come to shop, you want to put your goods where they shop. So the fact that they're coming around the Massey is because you're coming to shop. And we believe that, there's enough for everyone. And our role is to lift the standard in terms of whether it's health, whether it's quality operation, and support people. So maybe some of those same farmers will end up being in our nudge program and become, ancillary businesses around to support the economy.
And David, one of the points I wanted,
needs small business to grow.
Yeah, one of the points I wanted to make coming off from Dexter's comment is that I think it really makes the point that it can't be a one-size-fits-all across the region. So you have an economy like St. Vincent, still quite heavily agricultural, a large percentage of what you might call informal economy, and so on. So a shutdown is just going to cripple a country like that, and also not especially tourism dependent as well. Most of our tourists go to the Grenadines and so on. So it's really not a one-size-fits-all across the region. You really have to understand the structure of your economy and your society. I mean, I have a lot of academic collaborators in India, and they're like, India cannot lock down. Because in India, over 80-something% of their economy is informal. It is simply not an option for them. It would be nice to hear from our friend from Grenada, which is currently one of the hotspots. Calista, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. I've been listening diligently.
It's not Sunday, but I have a confession to make. I am from St. Vincent, and I've been living and working in Barbados, but Grenada is my favorite Caribbean island, so I have a soft spot for Grenada. So I've been bleeding with all the trouble you guys have been seeing down there with this pandemic. So can you give us a perspective as to how the pandemic is playing out in Grenada generally, and if you can, a little segue about the impact on business and so on?
All right, thanks for having me on, and I'm glad that you're among the multitude who consider Grenada to be their favorite place. It is everybody's favorite place. Yeah, it's been bad for us, as you know. We had this very long, in pandemic terms, very long honeymoon period where from August last year, we reopened just around the summer after this total lockdown that we had. Unlike St. Vincent, we locked down and we came back up in the summer. And since then, we've been at about 0 cases, no community spread for a very long time. We were catching all of the infections at the border and quarantining travelers who were coming into the country. And of course, it all went south this summer when the government, of course, changed its quarantine policy. Once vaccination became available, our new policy was that if you're fully vaccinated, you can enter the country and not stay 5 to 7 days in quarantine, but within 36 to 48 hours, you were free to get into the community. And it's believed that created a bit of a problem for us, and that allowed Delta strain to enter, because we were testing people at the border, but the samples we were taking was at the Maurice Bishop International Airport. And so the science says that it's quite likely that you have been infected within less than 4 days. You may not have the viral load that says that to be detected. And so then, of course, we had, the government had decided to take away the 2 days of carnivals. They went to Parliament and passed a law that said the 2 days of carnival would be working days. This angered the people. So we had the virus circulating. And then over the carnival period, you may have seen the videos, people came out in thousands, and it was called a jab protest, and played carnival anyhow. And I think that helped to spread the virus, and that the health officials lost track of contact tracing, which we were very good at from last year, March to now. We were able to do contact tracing and keep it all in the bottle. But with the mass gatherings and promoters were having events and so on, I think the government let their guard down a little bit, and did not want to upset the people too much, because the promoters were complaining about their livelihood. And so they allowed certain things to happen that created that sort of perfect storm where the virus was circulating and mass gatherings helped to spread it. And so we had a few weeks.
What has all of this done to business activity in Grenada and the economy?
Well, the shutdown last year, total shutdown, that really hurt businesses. And of course, tourism is about 40, 45%, just over 40% of our GDP. And that halted last year, totally. So by late last year, we were trying to bring tourism back online, and thought we were doing fine with that. It was gradually coming back up. The Minister of Tourism was talking about cruise ships coming back at Port St. George. And so we're seeing a slump again. Grenada is now, a number of countries we have travel advisories against us at this point. And so tourism is again severely affected. And the bump that slight bump we had, attempting to recover, because our revenue dropped by crazy amount, that 200 million or so at the port or something like that, and over 12% drop in our GDP as a result. Now we've had to lock down again for the last month or so. The last 5 or 6 weeks, we've had to lock down. Retail businesses shut down, except for supermarkets and service businesses such as insurance companies and so on. A lot of retail businesses have had to shut down. It's only on Tuesday, the Prime Minister announced that retail businesses would be able to operate again. Unemployment is really high at the moment as a result. And then you have the issue of vaccination. Our uptake has been, it was not very good. People were not rushing to be vaccinated. First, we had just AstraZeneca, and the issue of vaccine injury, all the information that was floating around, I think people were very reluctant. There was a lot of vaccine hesitancy. Even with our frontline workers, the CMO referred to vaccination rate among the health workers as significantly low. But then when these problems started a few weeks ago, we saw an uptick that people became afraid because we had one death. Throughout this whole thing, we had one death. Then people started dying. We had like 30 deaths and it kept climbing and 3 people were dying per day and so on. And now we're up to, I think, just about 150 people or so. I have the dashboard somewhere here. Just about right now, our deaths, 162 people have died. But our numbers have begun to go back down, 161 active cases right now. And our infection positivity rate at about 24% at the last count, which was about 48 hours ago. So people out of fear.
Yes, thanks. Let's come back here now to Ian Chinapu and ask the question of what are the lessons that you believe COVID has been able to teach business in the Caribbean so far?
3 things. 1, you must really invest in your employees. Invest in your employees. And not just in terms of the job that they have before them, but invest in them so that they are able to be in a space that they can adapt and be flexible and learn. So we've launched a learning institute, which is our version of a university in-house that is constantly looking for ways to bring our employees to another level in terms of being able to manage through situations. So we've empowered people at the front line to deal with the issues instead of asking a manager what to do. So we've learned that. And the connection to COVID is that I would say the group has said that has been probably the #1 reason we've been able to actually achieve growth during this COVID pandemic, even with many of our businesses being closed. The second thing is always manage your liquidity as well as your capital, because liquidity is what is most important in a crisis. Being able to pay those salaries, pay those suppliers, even when you are not getting paid. So for example, we represent many large global brands. We may have had shipments of tractors and trucks and cars and so on in train that we could not sell because we could not open. We still had to pay those people in order to maintain those brands and that representation, be it pharmaceuticals, be it, etc. And the third, and of course, being able to redirect your capital to places where you needed it. During this time, we have had very little layoffs, etc. And that's because we've been able to support the businesses that could not support themselves during the period and allow them to recover and rebound quickly. So if you have to send home your best people because you can't pay them, when the place opened back up, you might not get that person back. We never let them go. And that built a lot of trust, a lot of faith in the company by the employees. And that's why I said we never had a problem to get people to come out to work once they were able to do so. And the third lesson we've learned as senior leaders and as the board of Massey, I also sit on the board of Massey Holdings, is to trust your leadership and allow them, don't micromanage them. Don't say, oh my God, things are going bad. Listen, bring your experience to the table and then let them go. And I think that trust and that, what we're calling it autonomy by the board and understanding the what management was faced with and knowing that they didn't have all the answers, but allowing them to lead from the front instead of having to come back to the board for everything. was also a major factor in our ability to adapt and be flexible and respond very, very quickly. So response time was driven by that autonomy and that empowerment. And that in turn was gifted all the way through to allow people to do that. So those were the three things that we believe allowed us to actually grow during the period, notwithstanding or in spite of the challenges faced by having many of our businesses closed for months on end, and yet still keep all our employees and their benefits in place. Pension benefits, everything has actually increased in some countries, health benefits. So to allow Massey to rebound quickly and take advantage of opportunities that may present themselves in this space. For example, we've bought new additional groceries. We're partnering to establish new locations. And therefore, we are actually investing in a time when people are holding on to their long-term cash just to survive for the next few months. And actually, our debt ratios, so back to the professor for a second. Before COVID, our debt to equity ratio was about 35%. As of the third quarter, we are down to 25%. So we've actually paid down our debt. And what does that mean? From your explanation earlier on preference shares and comparing it to debt, it means we have less fixed charges to cover in a tight time period. And that is going to be money that we can use to sustain ourselves on our working capital and new investments that would have been used to pay for debt that is a fixed price.
But at the same time, you sold off a lot as well. And having made those sales, that should have put you in a stronger position, some might say.
Yeah, but we used none of that money to pay off debt. So we actually put the funds that we would have raised from selling companies into a fund and invested it into the US stock market 100%. And that fund we invested last year, $70 million. We're up to $76 million today. So that has actually provided greater diversification, because now that's a totally different market that we're in that represents further portfolio diversification, Professor, that is actually earning US dollars in a market that is challenged to earn US dollars because tourism and prices of our commodities and so on, and the ability to even get the product out of the country is challenged. So we now have an investment portfolio that's constantly growing, that further diversifies the risk of the group and allows us to have a war chest in order to pursue opportunities of investment. It's ready to pursue new opportunities. And in the meanwhile, we're investing it, and that's actually under my purview as well, in a group corporate treasury, which was established just last year in the middle of COVID.
Professor Robinson.
David, one of the questions in the chat from one of the participants, and I know it's directed at Massey and maybe anybody, but it certainly is one of the emerging issues around COVID. As economies reopen, we are seeing quite a bit of inflation in the region because of the supply chain and logistics issues.
Heavily supply chain related.
And so there's a question in terms of how is Massey navigating these supply chain issues? Is there any light you can shed on that?
Of course, that is huge. When you look at the price of ship a container, it has gone up by 1,000%. And I may be exactly correct, but it's gone up tremendously. So of course, remember I mentioned expansion into the US? What we're expanding in there is warehousing, distribution, space, so we can actually take advantage of bigger economies of scale. And therefore, while we are price takers when it comes to shipping, we do not own ships and shipping companies. We are doing our best to minimize the ultimate cost through our supply chain by expanding our group storage and distribution facilities and partnering with other Caribbean companies. I won't mention their names, I'm not authorized to do so, but other large people you might think are our competitors, but we have the same interests to make sure that people in our region get fairly priced products. So we would share space, and so on to reduce that cost. So we're being very collaborative in that space. We don't see ourselves as competitors, as people often put us down. And certainly, the other thing we're doing is ensuring that absolute efficiency in our local operations, our delivery system, so that where we can save money, that can also be passed on to the consumer. So when you look at the prices, while in the supply chain is going up, and it may actually go up to the consumers, it's going up at a slower rate to the extent we can build these efficiencies into the system. And that's what focus brings, because management is entirely focused on that now, not 7 industries, but 3. So it's the same people, but they're focusing much more on what is right in front of them. And I think that's the best we can do. You know, when it comes to things like shipping costs and the price of grain and the price of oil, we have very little say in that. And therefore, you know, what we can manage, what we can manage.
Professor Robinson, one area here that has taken at least one of the contributors here who is sending us text by surprise is the approach to technology. This person says, why did you exit the technology space if this represents the future of industry and society?
A really easy answer. When you look, so technology is many different sectors in one, right? Our technology business was a distribution business. We represented others like Oracle, etc. We were not creating and inventing technology. We were administering it. So we were still a customer to many people. And as you know, much of the technology is being developed by SME type enterprises. Our technology business was a great business, and it still is a great business. And it needed heavy investment in scale. And therefore, our decision to divest that company was not about it not being a great company or technology not being important. Is that where can that company itself grow to become a number 1 and number 2 company? And when we look at the kind of capital that was required and the type of focus that was required, it was better in the hands of someone else who had that focus, in this case, PBS Technologies. So not being in technology in the Caribbean does not mean we are not employing technology across the group. And just want to make sure that that's clear.
I think we have a hand up there.
Constantius Francois, I believe. You're on.
So Pamela, can you give that person permission to speak, Pam? And Ian, like, while that is being sorted, I sort of have a question for you, Ian, a sort of finance question. In terms of your restructuring and bringing more focus to your business, are you seeing that being rewarded by investors in the stock market? So again, I'm going to hold that, and so you can hold that because I still want to get the audience persons to get their questions in.
Sure.
So so we have Constantius and Eisenhower.
Douglas, okay, well, let me come in here. First of all, I'm very glad to be involved in this discussion. There are some old friends I haven't seen in a long time, the great David Ellis, when I lived in Barbados while Errol Barrow on his 2nd term as Prime Minister. I remember you point at issue. I used to listen to you every Sunday. Of course, Dr. Robinson, while I was at Cave Hill, I met you.
I think we've lost you though.
Eisenhower.
Yes.
Constantius
there.
Maybe he went back on mute, it looks like.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, you are on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I got back. So I've spoken about David Ellis and Justin Robinson, who I met while I lived in Barbados. I lived in Barbados for 6 years. My last daughter was actually born in Barbados. I'm a Bajan citizen in my household. And of course, I met the gentleman, Sidney Knox. He was on the board of directors of the CAIC at the time. And I just want to say how pleased I am to be in that company. Of course, Ralph Gonzalez was a very good friend of my deceased brother, Rosie Douglas. In fact, when Rosie passed, he found himself in Dominican funeral. So although I don't know you personally, Dexter Rose, but St. Vincent is very close to my heart. So I'm very glad to be here. Most interesting discussion. I'm an economist by training. I work for the government of Dominica. And I've worn several hats, over the years, So just listening. Thanks to Dr. Damien Dublin, who's a dentist. He's the one that alerted me to this discussion. And I'm very pleased to be here. No question in particular. I'm listening intently. Thank Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for that. Appreciate it.
So,
Mustachios is still there?
That
Because,
person needs to be muted though.
yeah,
She needs to unmute her mic. I've
Yes,
given
that's
her
where the
permission.
problem lies. And she
Okay.
may be having a problem with it. But you know, in the meantime, the other side of this COVID experience is the human loss. And your company in Chenapu, you told me it has over 12,000 people overall. Let's talk about the human side of this business in these months since March of last year. What has that been like, adjusting to this new reality in a company such as yours, spanning so many other jurisdictions?
it's been nothing like what we've experienced in our history before. And I think that, as you say, that the humanity of this event, it has really brought us closer. You know, losing loved ones, even if it's members of the family of employees, has caused, you know, great angst across the group. We have folks in Colombia who lost their lives, etc., etc. So, you know, being part of the Massey family, we feel that pain. And I say that it has caused us to just value the things we have, you know, even more so, and the relationships we have. So I've seen people who were not so friendly become very friendly. I've seen people who had issues with who was doing this and who was doing that no longer have those issues. People simply rallied together and pulled together. So I try to acknowledge the hardships that people faced, but I'm also very proud that the group was able to keep the vast majority of our people employed consistently throughout the process and allowed them to deal with what they had to deal with. Whether, I mean, you talk about the virus, but people had to homeschool their kids. People had to get, you know, their children taken care of. So the flexi time, you know, the speed at which the group amended its HR policies to allow for adaptive home, you know, work from home and so on, would be things that I would mention in terms of the people side of this change. And I don't think we'll go back to what we had before. We will go forward in a way that embraces things like flexi time, work from home, and all those hybrid operating models going forward, which I think has added to productivity, not taken away from it.
Let's hear from, I think it's Dr. Damien Dublin. You can unmute Dr. Dublin, and let's hear your question. While we wait for Dr. Dublin, though, what I'd like you to tell us, Mr. Chenapu, is you've spoken very positively about all the things that have been put in place. What are the disappointments?
I would still say that, you know, I may be speaking a little personally now, but I know my colleagues, many of my colleagues share it. I really, really wish that we had, you know, greater uptake in terms of the vaccine. You know, Trinidad is now implementing things like safe zones where only vaccinated people will be allowed, to give businesses a chance to reopen and in-house dining to come back and so on. But, you know, as I heard, I think Mr. Rose say, Dexter, that, you know, vaccine uptake in St. Vincent is so low. I really wish our people, and I respect their decisions and so on, but, you know, the more people, if we can get to that 75% hurdle, you know, many companies have achieved it, but many more have not. In our society, people are, you know, reluctant. There are lots of things going around, but I really hope that, you know, people see the value in that. And the big disappointment for me is that we missed the opportunity to become a vaccinated region and be among the first to welcome back our tourists, welcome back foreign direct investment, and you know, be at the forefront of the recovery. And right now we're struggling in the middle. And I think that would be a disappointment for the company. You know, to be honest, it hasn't been a lot of disappointment except for the lives that have been lost. But what I would say is that during this time, you know, we've struggled with our supply chain and our long-standing relationships People have said, okay, our production will only be for this country or for that country. So we've had to learn a lot and in due course, build new relationships. So these are things that, have not been all roses. But, we have an energy about us that says we believe all is well. We believe that we can weather any storm, and we bring that to the work that we do. So you'd appreciate how hard to answer your question. I've struggled.
David, I know Callistra has to leave at 7:30 for another engagement. And I would kind of like to ask her for her closing comments and what she sees as the main lessons learned so far from the Grenada experience with COVID.
Well, I think the main lesson that has been learned and recognized by the Grenadian people, though not so much by the government, is that this dependence that we have on tourism, as I was saying earlier, 40% of our GDP depends on tourism, and 20% of it depends on the existence of the St. George's University. Obviously, that is a very, very fragile place on which to build your economy. And across the region, we saw countries shutting down because the planes wouldn't come anymore and boats wouldn't come anymore. And I think what we need to recognize is that the leaders of the region, and not just the political leaders, the business leaders and everyone else of influence in the region, as well as the people, need to come to a place where we stop putting all of our eggs in that very fragile tourism basket. Once the pandemic hit Grenada, we were on our knees because tourism is all we had going on. So, and I think there's a lot of talk in Grenada now about economic diversification. We've talked about it over the decades, of course, and but it's always been a talk shop. But right now, the conversation and the narrative is showing that the people, the rank and file of the country, are now recognizing that they must speak more along those lines to lobby the government to focus a bit more on other issues. What lesson we learned was that agriculture was so badly treated because once the pandemic exposed a lot of the holes that we had in our existence as a nation. And another lesson was just that people need to look out for each other more. We had a lot of selfishness, which also helped to spread the virus, because people after a while just did not care and just did whatever they wanted. And I think we're beginning to recognize now that as a people and as a community, Grenada was a very close-knit community, me for you and you for me kind of thing. And we lost that because of the type of politics, the political style we've had over the last few election cycles. We lost that. And I think we've begun to recognize that now, where COVID has removed all the colors, and put us all just under our flag. And people are recognizing now that we all need to stand together. Right now you have people, the country is now, one of the buzz now is that the Prime Minister gave an address on Tuesday, and he thanked an activist of the opposition National Democratic Congress who'd been doing food trays and so for the frontline workers, and he thanked him in a national address. Now that became a big talking point, that the Prime Minister was thanking someone from the other side, because the division among us has been so deep. So I think we're beginning to find ourselves and to find that unity is what is required, as well as the holes in our economic situation.
Yeah, I think you're really maybe coming to a key point on the vaccine hesitancy that I'm thinking, David, to the extent to which many people see taking the vaccine almost as if you're endorsing the policies of a current administration, and persons who are not necessarily in favor of that administration. Some of the vaccine resistance is almost equated to political resistance. I think it alludes as well to some quite low levels of trust in politicians and institutions in the region. And I think a core to this is the level of trust. Next, I'm going to ask you for your closing remarks.
But let me just say
Sorry?
quickly here, Professor, that in Grenada, in the beginning, it sort of started out that way, but what you have now is, for instance, the main opposition party, they have been doing jingles and they are on a campaign supporting the government's vaccination drive. They've come out, a lot of it has to do with political expediency, I'm sure, but they have actually joined forces on the health front to encourage vaccination and have come out in support of vaccination, as has the union. About 60 workers at SGU feel like they threw them under the bus. They no longer have a job as a result of the vaccination policy, but the union is not putting pressure on SGU because of the position that they stated very, very early on. And also on vaccination, we just quickly before I got that employment with vaccination. Now, the government themselves, they have not placed those conditions on the thousands of workers who are employed by the government that they need to be vaccinated in order to work. But they've done so for the private sector, a list of businesses, daycare centers, bartenders, hairdressers, restaurants, and so on. And they've said, in an attempt to bring business back and to give people, as Ian said, a sort of safe zone in which to operate. So that's one of the major steps we've taken here this week with vaccination. It was to peg businesses whose staff are not fully vaccinated, are not allowed to operate. And of course, there are legal penalties as a result.
Okay, thanks for that. And thanks for joining. Dexter, any quick final words for us from the VNC perspective?
Very, very quickly, Justin, picking up from where our sister there left off. We've had a somewhat similar, yet dissimilar situation here, because a lot of the vaccine hesitancy, there is genuine hesitancy. A lot of it, I dare say, is out of ignorance. People just don't trust authority anymore, and it's a problem we should recognize all across the Caribbean. There are some persons who took a political edge that they were not taking Ralph vaccine. That didn't make any sense, But you had Sir James Mitchell, who was the leader of the founder of the New Democratic Party, the opposition party. He's been very strong pro-vax, very, very strong. As a matter of fact, he came on the radio recently and criticized the members of the leading members of his party, the party he founded, for wavering on the issues. But Justin, I'd like to say that St. Vincent, it still worries me. The hesitancy worries me, the low pickup, because while we've only lost, and imagine I'm saying while we've only lost, because one death is too much. I'm saying this because I'm comparing the amount of deaths with neighboring Grenada, which was the gold standard sometime last year for us. 33 persons have been lost here, sadly. It is beginning to shake people up, but not sufficiently. We went through the volcanic eruption, and I think St. Vincent came out great in that we had to have people in emergency shelters. And one would have expected a major blossoming of cases. It didn't happen. And I'd like to congratulate the authorities, the health authorities, and the persons, the National Emergency Management Organization, for the way to manage those things. And we are going forward. And if any Vincentians are listening to my voice today, please, not another death. Take the vaccine. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dexter. Appreciate it.
I've got a program at 9. I'm inviting you all to join me at NBC Radio.
Yes,
That's
jazz program.
So I've got to leave you.
Dr. Dublin was supposed to have been saying something. I don't know if he...
Yeah, but Dr. Dublin won't turn on your mic.
Okay, so we've gone past our time, 7:30. So I really want to thank all of our panelists and participants. I want to thank David for taking some time out of his busy schedule to help us navigate this. Again, we are quite committed to keeping this quarterly webinar going, just to really build that interest and build a community of investors across the region. We want to thank the Chinapool for taking some time. We try on every webinar to have a senior executive from one of our listed companies to give that inside look. So again, I really appreciate everyone coming on. Thanks. Have a great evening and stay safe.
Justin,
Yes,
just before you go,
there's one question that was not answered.
just before you go,
You know, Neil and is Sidney Knox still alive? Sidney
no,
Knox.
he died a while ago.
Oh, he passed. He's passed. Okay, may his soul rest in peace. Thank you.
My knowledge, to my knowledge, I want to say that I found this particular discussion this evening particularly good, and it is saying to us that across this region we have so many younger leaders in business who are not necessarily well known across the region, but have a lot to say. One of the most interesting aspects of this development with respect to the Massey Group has to do with the issue of continuity. To what extent are these ideas and these plans that you have outlined and this momentum that you have demonstrated that you have, to what extent is that personalized? To what extent is it in a situation, in a form that will allow continuity? If the leader dies, does it die? If the leader changes, does it change? All of that has been thrown up before us.
That is such a wonderful question. And it's so important for the region, not just for the Massey Group.
Correct.
But I would say that in the Massey Group, the leaders lead in a different way. They lead, we actually have something that we designed called Listen Like a Leader. And that should tell you how leadership really happens. It's about enabling others and then you listening. So a lot of the things that we have done that have been successful were not designed or originated with the leadership.